So, as I said, welcome to today's webinar. So, my name is Daniel. I'm a caseworker with Migrant Rights Centre Ireland, MRCI. And today's webinar is around the reactivation application for employment permit holders in Ireland. And it's going to be an information session on that. So before we get into today's session, just a quick overview as to who Migrant Rights Centre Ireland are. I'm sure some of you are already familiar. We are a national organisation working to advance the rights of migrant workers and their families at risk of exploitation, social exclusion and discrimination. We handle up to 3,500 cases a year through our National Information and Support Centre, which is a free and confidential service. We provide information, support, and advocacy on a wide variety of different issues, which includes various means such as face-to-face, telephone, email, primarily around immigration rights and employment rights. And we've been taking a stand with migrants to tackle the root causes of inequality since 2001. Okay, so just as well before we get started, a quick disclaimer that the materials have been prepared by the Migrant Rights Centre Ireland for information purposes only, with no guarantee as to accuracy or applicability to a particular set of circumstances. The materials are not intended and should not be considered to be legal advice. The information given may change from time to time and may be out of date. The Migrant Rights Centre Ireland disclaims any legal responsibility for the content or the accuracy of the information provided. MRCI is not a practicing law centre. So, fun stuff out of the way. So today's agenda, we're going to start by talking about what reactivation is. We will look at the benefits of reactivation, why it's something worth applying for if you are eligible. Then, of course, we are going to look at the eligibility criteria themselves. As I'll talk about in the presentation, reactivation is a two-step application process. So I'm going to go through both the step of applying to immigration for permission to apply for reactivation and how to apply for the actual reactivation permit through the DETE. I'm going to touch on some important information that I think people should know about the reactivation application, and then we will have time at the end for a Q&A. So as I said at the beginning, if you have some questions, please put them in the Q&A box, which you can see at the bottom. So what is reactivation itself? So the reactivation employment permit scheme, this is taken from the Department of Justice website. So the purpose of the scheme, which is operated by the DETE, is to provide to a non-EEA national worker who has held or holds an employment permit a pathway to legal re-employment where they have fallen out of employment and immigration permission through no fault of their own, or who has been exploited or poorly treated by their employer. So I guess to simplify it, the main points here are it's for people who are employment permit holders or were employment permit holders in Ireland who have fallen out of the system through no fault of their own for whatever reason, or who may still be in the employment system but are being exploited or mistreated by their employer. Now, it's important to emphasize that the name can be a little bit misleading because despite the word reactivation, the reactivation employment permit is its own type of separate employment permit with the DETE, just like there is general employment permit and critical skills permit, which some of you may be more familiar with. Reactivation is a separate permit, so it's not anything to do with reactivating your old permit or anything like that. As I said in the agenda, applying is a two-step process. So firstly, the applicant must apply to the Department of Justice to Immigration to receive a permission letter, which will allow the applicant to then apply for the reactivation employment permit. And then secondly, with this permission letter, the applicant can apply for a reactivation employment permit with the DETE. Now, the benefits of a reactivation employment permit, there are a number of benefits, and these are benefits particularly over a regular general employment permit, and I'm going to go through these. So firstly, and quite an important one, this applies to, so when you make an application for a general employment permit, there is something called a labor market needs test that needs to be completed. Some of you may be familiar with it. Essentially, what it means is that the employer must advertise the job for 28 days before they apply for the permit for the employee. If they don't do this properly on the correct websites, then the permit is not accepted by the DETE. The good thing with a reactivation permit is that a labor market needs test is not required. On a critical skills permit, it's not required either, but this is a benefit over the general employment permit. Another benefit that makes finding a job at times easier is that, unlike with general and critical skills permit, where there are minimum salary requirements, so again, some of you may know that on a general permit, for the majority of jobs, the minimum salary requirement is €34,000 per year. €30,000 for some jobs like healthcare assistant or horticultural workers. On a reactivation permit, there is no minimum salary requirement, as long as you are being paid at least minimum wage, which as of now is €13.50 per hour in Ireland. The good thing as well is that, as I said, it's a two-step process. The first step is applying with immigration. You can make the application with immigration even if you still have an employment permit and are still working. And this touches on the next point, which is that if you are feeling that you are stuck in an exploitative workplace and working conditions, you can make an application for reactivation even while you still have your existing permit. If you explain your circumstances, then you should be granted permission to apply for reactivation. The other thing, and you would have seen it mentioned in the description of the scheme, you can apply even if your immigration permission has expired. So one example of this, and we see this quite regularly in MRCI, if an employer is unwilling to renew your work permit for whatever reason that's out of your control, and let's say your permit is not renewed and your immigration permission has expired, you can still apply for reactivation. Because, and I'll get into this more later in the presentation, but if you are successful with immigration, they give you a 6-month extension of your permission to be able to apply for reactivation employment permit. And finally, another advantage, the reactivation permit can be issued for any jobs in any sectors, except certain domestic care jobs. So you do not have to continue working in the same sector or the same job role as you were in on your previous permit. You can apply for pretty much any jobs. Now, importantly, it's the eligibility criteria. This is taken directly from the immigration website. So you can see here, you may be eligible for the scheme if you held an employment permit issued by the DETE to work in the state. You're currently in the state and your immigration permission has run out. You have fallen out of employment through no fault of your own. You have remained in the state since you lost your job. You are the holder of a reactivation employment permit already, and you've been made redundant. And also importantly to note here, if you're the holder of a reactivation employment permit and you wish to change employer, you can apply for permission through this scheme. Excuse me. Because change of employer doesn't apply to the reactivation permit. Now, I would add to these criteria that if you've been mistreated or exploited at the workplace, you may also be eligible. So you can see here that it says if your immigration permission has run out or you've fallen out of employment. But as I said, if you are being mistreated at the workplace, you can apply for reactivation. And as I said, this can be the case even if your permit is still active. Now, in terms of the application process itself, step one, as I said, so the step two, which is applying for the permit itself through the DETE, cannot be done if you don't have permission from immigration, specifically to apply for a reactivation employment permit. If you try to apply for the permit without that permission, the DETE will refuse your application. So the first step is applying to immigration for a permission letter, which grants you 6 months on a stamp 1 to apply for a reactivation employment permit. Now, as with a lot of applications and queries now, the reactivation needs to be submitted through the customer service immigration portal. You can see the photo on the right-hand side. That's the home page for the portal. Again, some of you may already be familiar with it. If you have not come across this before and you don't have an account, you can have a look at our immigration portal info webinar, which is on our YouTube, and also the Department of Justice guide on using the portal. We will be sharing this presentation with everybody who has attended or who has signed up, and there will be a useful link slide in the presentation. So I will include both our webinar and the Department of Justice guide on using the portal if people need information on how to register an account on this system. Now, once you have registered your account, you need to fill out the reactivation application form, which you can find on the Department of Justice page. Again, I will link all of this in the useful links slide. So the form is split into, apologies, I should say 4 sections, not 3 sections. So section 1 and 2 is pretty basic. It just answers basic questions, personal info, and your immigration status in Ireland. Now, section 3, which you can see on the right-hand side, that's a snapshot of the form. It asks for information as to why you are making the application to check that you are eligible. So you can see on the right-hand side there's a number of different tick boxes. So for example, you can see 1A, I lost my employment due to no fault of my own. Or B, due to the increase in DETE salary thresholds, my employer won't apply for a permit. Or D, for example, the 50-50 rule. So tick the box that applies to your situation. You can tick more than one if needed. And make sure that you can see there's a box which says include further any relevant information in the box below. Make sure to provide a bit of background information on why you are making the application. So for example, if you were terminated from your work and it's through no fault of your own, give some information as to the circumstances, when it happened, why it wasn't your own fault. Similarly, if it's because you are being mistreated at the workplace, just provide some information as to what kind of mistreatment, how it's been happening, when it started, that kind of thing, just so that the department understands why you are making the application. Now, section 4 just lists the required documentation that you need. Most of it is pretty straightforward. You'll see in the application form, we're talking about just copy of the biometric page of your passport, your IRP card, your employment permit, the entry stamp in your passport when you came into Ireland, and also, and I'll mention this a bit later and go into a bit more detail, they ask for a letter from the DETE or your employer explaining why you weren't able to renew your permit. I will explain that in a bit more detail later on in the application. So once you've filled out the application form, you need to log into your portal. When you log in, you will see this home page that you can see here. And on the left-hand side, you see I've circled the button Submit Query. So you need to press that. And then you'll see this page come up and it'll ask you which query category you want to go to. So you can see here, you need to pick domestic residence and permission. For a subtype of query, which will appear, you press Submit an application to DRP. And then for topic of query, choose Reactivation Employment Permit, and then press Next at the bottom left. After that, you'll see a page like this. So in details of query, just write a similar message to what I've written here, basically explaining that you are submitting your application for reactivation. You've attached a completed application form as well as all required supporting documents. Then you can see beneath that, it says choose file. So that's where you attach your documents. Now, just to note, at the moment, the portal only accepts one file at a time. So I will include in the useful link slide a website that we regularly use to merge all your files together into one. So that will be your application form and all of the relevant supporting documents. So once you've attached your application, and then you press the Submit Query button at the bottom. So once your query is submitted, you will get, as with any query you submit through the portal, you will get email saying that your query has been submitted. With reactivation specifically, after a little bit of time, you're going to get a letter which is just an acknowledgement letter from Domestic Residence and Permission, who's the department in charge of reactivation applications. This letter will just state they've received your application, the date that they've received your application, and they'll also give you an application number, which is useful if you want to contact the department about your application number. You'll need to quote that. Now, through the process of them making a decision to give you your reactivation permission, if they require more information, they're going to make contact with you either through the portal directly or by email. Now, if your application is successful, I have put up on the slide here an example of what the permission letter looks like. So you can see here that it specifically specifies that you have permission under the reactivation employment permit scheme. And that's very important because in order to be able to apply for reactivation permit with the DETE, your letter needs to specify that you have permission to apply for reactivation. Also, as I said before, this is a 6-month stamp 1 permission, which if, let's say, your IRP card has expired during the process or it was already expired, you can use this letter to renew your IRP card. And then once you have this letter, you can go on to the next step when you have an employer to apply for the permit itself. Just to make note, currently processing times can be a little bit slow. It can take a number of months, sometimes 3 months, sometimes maybe even a little bit more, but it can take some time to get this letter. If you want to ask for an update about your application, you can submit a query through the same immigration portal that you submitted your application on to ask for an update. And again, like I said, quote your application number when you're looking for an update so that they can find your application. Excuse me. Now, once you have completed that first step and you have your permission letter from immigration, then you're ready to apply for a reactivation employment permit. Keep in mind, of course, as with any work permit, at this point, you need to have an offer from an employer who's willing to take you on a work permit. Now, as of April 2025, the DET also has its own online portal where all permit applications are operated through, not just reactivation, but general permits, critical skills, they're all done through the DET portal. So the first step at this point is to make sure you make an account on the employment permit portal. Now, it's important to note that when you're applying for a permit, regardless of who starts the application process, both the employer and employee needs to have an account on the portal. So your employer also has to register on this portal, the DETE portal. Because even if you as the employee start the application, you fill out your section, then the employer needs to log on to their portal and fill out their section. So I've linked the website here. Again, this will all be sent when we share the slides with everybody. The employment permit portal is still a relatively new website, so there can be some glitches. So if you're having any issues with creating an account, you can email epos@enterprise.gov.ie, and they should be able to fix the problem that you might be having. And I just included a photo there. That's what the employment permits online website looks like. Now, as I said, it is important to note that both the employer and employee need to register an account on the DETE portal in order to apply for the permit. The employee on their own cannot do the process by themselves, and neither can the employer on their own. As I said, either party can start the process of applying for the permit, but at some point, both parties need to be involved. They need to answer the relevant questions and attach supporting documents. So again, in the useful slides link that you will get when I share this presentation, we'll include the DETE portal guide. So that's a guide for how to use the website, but also how to apply for a permit. Now, most of their application, their guides are referring to general employment permits, but to be honest, the process is pretty similar. Similar questions are asked and similar documents are submitted. However, it is important to note that when you are making the application, make sure that you choose the reactivation employment permit, not general employment permit or critical skills. If you want to apply for reactivation, you need to pick that specific permit. As well, the whole point of getting the letter from immigration, that's step one, is to make sure that you attach it with your application to the DETE. If the DETE doesn't see this letter, then they're not going to accept your reactivation permit application. As well as this, because reactivation employment permit, you're applying for a new permit, there is a fee for the permit itself, similarly to a general employment permit or critical skills permit that you apply for. So as with those, there's a payment of €1,000, which needs to be made for a 2-year permit. So that's paid directly either by the employer or the employee. There's an option when you're applying for the permit through the portal, it'll ask you who is making the payment. Now, it is very important to note, if the employer agrees to make the payment through the DET portal, they cannot then at a later stage deduct this from your salary as an employee. So if the employer starts to say that they're going to deduct the permit from your salary, and that is illegal, you can inform your employer that, and if you're having any issues with that, feel free to contact us. We can try to support you with this problem. There is some delays at the moment with the DET processing times for permits in general, not just reactivation. It's around 2 months now or so for a new permit to be issued, but this will change. Hopefully it's going to get faster again soon. Usually they're a month, sometimes even less than a month. Again, in the useful links slide, I will share a link to where you can see the DET processing times. And just note, there's no specific section for reactivation. Reactivation permit will just fall under a new permit application. So that's the application process. Just again to reiterate, it is 2 steps. You need to go through immigration first and through the application form there. Again, all of that will be shared in the slides. So I'll share the application form itself and the page on immigration, everything like that. So that's the first step. You need to wait for that. That can take a few months. Once you have the permission letter, then you can apply to the DET for the reactivation permit. Now, of course, just to note, obviously, with that, one drawback of reactivation is it can take a little bit of time at the moment. You know, if you combine those two, we could be talking maybe 4 months altogether, maybe a little bit more for the process to be complete and for you to be able to get your reactivation permit. And I suppose just to emphasize as well, the letter that you get from immigration only gives you permission to seek employment. That letter doesn't give you permission to work. So you only have legal permission as a stamp 1 holder to work with an active employment permit. So you cannot legally start working until you have your reactivation permit issued to you. Okay, so one thing, and we've been in contact with the Department of Justice about this. There has recently been regular requests from immigration in the first step of the application for letters from employers or job offer letters. Now, we have been told that this is, and it's been confirmed to us multiple times, that this is not a requirement. So when you're applying for the first step to immigration, you do not need an employer already, because the purpose of this is that it gives you 6 months to find an employer who will then apply for a permit. So if you are being asked for a job offer letter by immigration in the first step, that is incorrect. And if you do not have one, you can contact us and we can support you to communicate with the department to make sure that this is not going to have an impact on your application. Secondly, as I stated when I was showing the example of the permission letter, so the permission letter from immigration needs to specify the word reactivation on it. There are some versions of that letter which just are generic permission letter that just allow you to apply for an employment permit. If you've applied for reactivation and the permission letter you get doesn't state that you have specific permission to apply for reactivation, then that's the wrong letter that you've received. And you won't be able to apply for a reactivation permit with the DET. If that happens, contact the department and let them know, ask them for the correct letter. And also, if that's not working or you're not sure what to do, contact us in MRCI and we can support you to try to get the correct letter. I briefly touched on this, but in the required supporting documents, there's the following request. So they want a letter from the Department of Enterprise, Tourism and Employment or your employer detailing the reason for your application for reactivation. Now, again, this is in the first step to immigration. If you have a termination letter from your employer or any communication, say by email or letters with your employer, explaining why you are applying for reactivation. So, for example, if you've been unfairly terminated at work and you have proof of that in an email where your employer terminated you, that's acceptable to meet this requirement. Or if you've been mistreated or exploited at the workplace, if you, for example, raised a complaint, that can be uh, detailing the reason for the application. That can be accepted for this part. As well as that, if let's say you're terminated and your employer cancels your permit, when that happens, you usually get an email from the DETE confirming that your permit's been cancelled. You can use that, so you can attach that email as proof. That can count as a letter from the DETE. Just to note as well, I mentioned it earlier, the change of employer scheme, which some of you may be familiar with, which allows you to change employer as a work permit holder after 9 months or less than 9 months in exceptional circumstances. It doesn't apply to those on the reactivation permit. The DETE states that it's for people on general permit or critical skills. So if a reactivation employment permit holder wants to change employer, they apply for reactivation again, and then they can apply for a reactivation permit. Now, a reactivation permit is required. So a reactivation permit, in regards to getting a stamp 4, it's the same as a general employment permit. So obviously with critical skills permit, if you have it for 2 years, then you can switch to a stamp 4. Reactivation permit counts as a general permit, so you need to have it for 5 years to be able to apply for a stamp 4. So that's most of the information now from today's webinar. I just want to mention that obviously I've said there are certain times where you may need to contact us for support, or maybe you're having problems with the reactivation application, something is not working, or you need more information, or in general, as I said at the beginning, we work around immigration and employment issues. Feel free to contact our information and support center. Now, we are currently running on an appointment basis only, so if you do want to speak to us, the best way to get in touch is by sending us a message via the contact page on our website, which looks like this. So you just fill that out with your information, give us as much info about what you're looking for support with, and then one of our caseworkers will get back to you directly. Again, I will link this all in the presentation. Finally, if you'd like to get involved with the work that MRCI does, there's a few links to our websites if you'd like to join any of our campaigns, which includes, we have an employment permit campaign, which revolves around campaigning for fairer systems for employment permit holders in Ireland and better treatment for employment permit holders. If you'd like to sign up as a supporter, there is a link there. And if you'd like to donate to MRCI, you can also follow that link there. And also for any regular updates, any other webinars we might be running, or important updates from immigration or from the DETE, we share them on our social media. So you can find us on any of those platforms there, and feel free to follow us for more info. So thank you all very much for coming to today's webinar.